All right. So again, thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. This is part three in the three-part series of Brand New to Birding with Luke Safford. We have Luke here today. We appreciate the big crowd, and I believe Luke's about to start sharing his screen. So I will turn it over to him now.
Right on. Thanks, Danito. Appreciate you starting this off, and thank you to all of you for being a part of this. I know I met many of you before, but maybe not everyone. Yeah, um, this is the second best way to meet you. I guess the first way would be at Sweetwater Wetlands. You know, if we could ever go birding together, that would be better. But it's good to be all together this morning, talking about what it's like to be brand new to birding. And this is our third session of this series, the third and last session. Each one of these sessions, we also kind of have a couple different field trips specific to this class after each of the different events. So we do have two different field trips that'll be coming up that will be at Sweetwater. And so the links to sign up for those field trips will be in the follow-up email as well. So there's one in the afternoon and there's one in the evening in the next couple of weeks. And so look for that. Hopefully we'll actually get to go birding together. But today we're going to just get into some of the specifics about how to go about identifying birds and thinking through different families, thinking about their behavior, thinking about shape, thinking about habitat. The past couple sessions, we've covered things from bird books to binoculars to being outside and just what it's like to learn to be immersed in it. We've talked about eBird a little bit. We've talked about different bird lists and how to bird a location and where to look at a location, you know, where to find birds. And so one of the things that we talked about at session 2 was getting on the eBird and taking an eBird photo quiz. And that's one of the, I think if you're not going to be outside immersing yourself in the habitat and the birds themselves, one of the best ways to go about growing in your bird identification is taking these photo quizzes. And I'm wondering if any of you had a chance to do a photo quiz since our last time we got together in December. And if so, maybe one or two of you share your experience of whether you found that fruitful or not. Anyone get a chance to do that? Feel free to take yourself off of mute and share your experience.
I did, Luke. It was a lot of fun. I love taking tests, so it was a great challenge, but the highest I ever got was 15 out of 20. And yeah, I even changed it to just Tucson instead of Pima, thinking I'm going to get an A+, and I never did. It was a lot of fun though.
Well, 15 out of 20 is still passing. That's good. That's really good. The thing that surprised me the most is that you said you like to take tests.
Yeah.
Maybe this test is fun, but yeah, that's not, I don't hear that a lot. At least I don't hear that from my kids that they like to take tests, but
Yeah, it was great. Thank you
thanks for
for
sharing,
sharing
Anne-Marie.
that feature.
Yeah. Anyone else have a chance to do this?
So I did it also. And I plan to do it multiple times. I don't remember my percentages, but I thought it was really fun and a good way to learn the birds.
I'm great. That's great, Linda. I'm glad that you had a chance to do it. And yeah, don't worry so much about the grades. You're not trying to get into college or anything like that. There's no real repercussions for getting a 15 or 16 or 5 or 4 out of 20. So don't worry about that and just have fun with it. Hey, you know, that's a big thing that I want to just kind of start off everything with today is just have fun with birding. There's, you know, we're not going to identify everything. And I said that in the first session. That's one of the number one rules. Don't worry about having to identify everything. Just enjoy it, experience it. We don't need to get caught up in trying to, you know, kill ourselves over figuring out whether it's a Pacific slope or Cordilleran flycatcher. In fact, we don't really have to do that anymore because they combine that into one species. Thank God. but still like Dusky or Hammond's Flycatcher. Don't worry about that. Just have fun with it, learn from it, along with having fun, learning, continued growth. That's an important thing for all of us, no matter what age we are or where we're at in our beginning or maturity in birding, just always learning. And I have to say, I learn as much from y'all who consider yourselves beginning birders as I do from people who are eBird reviewers and have been doing it forever. So yeah, let's dig into this a little bit. And I do want to encourage you to continue to take those photo quizzes if you have a chance, and especially if you like tests, go for it. So what I want to do today is we're going to look at some different bird groups, bird families that are really foundational to not just being able to identify those species or those families, but it's concepts that carry over into identifying really anything you're seeing. We're not going to talk about waterfowl or raptors or gulls today. We're going to especially look at passerines, so like songbirds, smaller birds that before we get into birding, we don't really recognize that there is even such a thing as a vireo. I bet you if I went to my gym tomorrow and I asked everyone who came into the gym if they knew what a vireo was, maybe one or two of them would know, but I highly even doubt that. Outside the birding world, no one knows what vireos are. They may know what ducks are. They definitely know what hawks are, but vireos, wrens, warblers, those are the things creepers, those are the things we're going to look at today and carry those principles over into all the birds that we look for on a regular basis. So this right here, this is a Bell's vireo. And the reason I chose this as the picture for learning these basics is that this is one of the most plainest birds I could ever think of. Danito, what do you think? Can you think of a plainer bird than Bell's vireo? What do you think? Nothing, right? Nothing.
Nothing really. Yeah.
There's
It's
maybe a
pretty
little
plain.
bit of yellow, kind of like even this picture makes it look even plainer. There's not much. There's a little bit of wing bars, not much of a spectacle, just a tinge of a spectacle there. Just gray. Got a cool voice though. I should have put the voice on here. So let's dig into this. So yesterday we were doing a training for volunteer field trip leaders for Tucson Audubon. And in one of the was that yesterday? Yeah, that was yesterday. Trying to remember what day it was. But in one of the trees, as we were standing there talking, there was house finches, vermilion flycatchers sharing the tree together. 2 vermilion flycatchers and like 4 or 5 house finches. And I thought it was really cool to be able to see those 2 different species, and not just different species, but different family groups together, seeing how the body structure was different, seeing how their posture was different, seeing their bill shape was different, and reminding myself and sharing with our trainees how great it is when you're leading a field trip that if you see birds together like that, to take a moment to just kind of notice those differences together and verbalize it and talk about it. And so it goes right along with this first thing. Seeing these different families together is very helpful. And as a beginning birder, as any birder, like we should, when we see this, instead of just hopping about from place to place, pause in that moment and look how the different birds' shapes differ, and think about how that helps you with your identification process. Think about how it relates to them with what they eat. Think about how it relates, how their behavior relates together. Those are the times when you learn the most. So here we have 4 different, not just species, but you have 4 different family groups. Up in the top left, we have a Lincoln sparrow. On the top right, we got orange crown warbler. And this is this picture right here. You don't always see this little orange. That's about as much orange as you're going to get on that little sucker. But it's pretty unbelievable that we even have that. Down in this bottom left, you got ruby crown kinglet. And then in the bottom right, you got marsh wren. You see the habitat for these all look pretty similar. These were all pictures taken by my friend Tom, who works down at the Patton Center. And they're all pictures that I believe were taken at Sweetwater Wetlands, right along, like if you're standing there at the bathroom and you're looking out over the little creek, and on the other side of the creek, right next to you, is this bramble of four-winged saltbush and some other bushes in there. But you can see this is all these pictures right here are in that same place. And so if you can find a location like that, whether you're here in Tucson or Colorado or Washington State, find a spot where multiple different bird families get together and just soak it in, take it in, look at how they are different. So let's get a little interactive. Someone who hasn't shared yet, come off of mute and help me work through just a little bit what you see differences between these 4 different families. Would someone be extroverted enough to unmute themselves and work through this with me?
The beak size and length.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. Yeah, beak size and length. The beaks are so important, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
What else do we see?
The kinglet has some white around its eyes.
Yeah, I love to look at wing bars, eye rings, caps, napes, all those sorts of things. Yep, that's a
Luke,
really.
this is Bob and Jane. Behavior, like the kinglets bouncing all over the place.
Yes.
What about the other ones? Anything distinctive in behavior?
Yeah, so let's take Lincoln Sparrow. I love to try and describe behaviors just like you did. So a ruby crowned kinglet bouncing around. Lincoln Sparrow, whether this makes sense to people or not, I think of it as mousy. Mousy in the sense that it kind of scurries a little bit. It's not real deliberate in its movement, not real slow, but it's kind of has a mousy look to it. I don't know if that makes sense, but trying to describe it in ways that make sense to you.
Only
Yeah.
one of them perches with his tail feathers up.
Yes, that's the marsh wren, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's very, very helpful. So it's a trademark for wrens to kind of put their tail up like that. Now there are a few other distinct species in different families that might do that, but wrens especially. So if you see a bird with its tail propped up like that, don't just take that in itself, but at least that kind of points you in the right direction. Oh, it's either a wren or it's wren-like. Any other thoughts on these guys?
The placement of the head on the body, like the Lincoln Sparrow has the head more towards the top of the body, whereas the kinglet, it's kind of squished on to the front of the body.
Yeah. So like posture in it too, like how it holds its head. Or yeah, a kinglet doesn't even look like it has a head. You're so right. I've never noticed that before, but using words like squished helps you remember it. I love that, Greg. I think this is a key thing for us as we grow in understanding and being able to identify birds, is putting words like that. I guess it's called, like, kind of in some ways anthropomorphizing birds too, like putting trying to describe it in a kind of human characteristic as well too, that helps us to get that in our mind so we can remember it better. It's just like how acronyms work, or descriptive words, it just kind of cements that in our mind. So anytime you see them together, take a moment. So let's get into a few of these different bird families. And the first one I want to look at are flycatchers. Flycatchers can be fairly difficult depending on what kind of, even within the family of flycatchers, you have other little subsets. So someone might flycatcher would be, a fairly, common way of describing a bird. And people at my gym might understand a flycatcher, but they certainly wouldn't really recognize Phoebe or Peewee or Impidinax or Myarchus. So these are all like little subset family groups within the family of flycatchers. And so understanding how, the bigger family of flycatchers and how these different smaller little subset families work within that is very helpful when it comes to identification. So flycatchers in particular, they many of them like to perch out in the open. The Say's Phoebe down here at the bottom. They're talking about renaming a lot of these different birds that are named after people. Say's Phoebe being one of them. Like if we were going to rename it, it could be like fence post Phoebe or roadside Phoebe, because a lot of times they'll be perched up on fence posts or railings alongside the road or telephone poles, stuff like that. Same with like kingbirds. Western wood peewees love to perch up at the tops of snags. Same with all-sided flycatchers. So a lot of times, like think about when you see a bird, like where in the grand scheme of the habitat is it perched up high? Thinking about whether it's deep inside or where it's perched can be a helpful clue in identifying these birds. So here are some things to pay attention to when it comes to birds and determining whether it's a flycatcher or not. If we're from Tucson, we're pretty familiar with vermilion flycatchers. And so, thinking about what they do is a really good start. So behavior, whether, like if they are perched on a fence like this, a lot of times what will flycatchers do? Think about how they feed from that fence. They'll jump off the fence and kind of sally. It's called sallying, kind of like hovering a little bit, catch a bug. And what do, they return back to that same perch. If they do land on the ground, they're not going to walk around. They're going to just land on the ground, pick something up, fly back to their exposed open perch so they can pick up more bugs like that. Not very many other species do that. There are a few that will kind of imitate a flycatcher at times. Ruby-crowned kinglet will flutter its wings a whole bunch at times and look like it'll be kind of catching bugs, but totally different body shape and size, right? So a flycatcher usually has a shorter and somewhat broad bill, but a ruby-crowned kinglet, if you think back to that picture we saw, it's got a really small, thin bill. Yellow rump warblers will also sometimes jump off of exposed snags and flutter out there and catch bugs and return back. But again, different body shape and bill structure than flycatchers. So voice is usually a good thing when it comes to flycatchers. Here, let's play a Western wood peewee here. I just realized I forgot to share my sound. I'm gonna do that real quick. All right, share screen, share sound. And I also realized that my hearing for Western wood peewees is not what it used to be. So let's play this again. Boy, there's a lot of birds I can hear in there, but that Western wood peewee is pretty quiet. But they have pretty distinct calls, both not just Western wood peewee, but really any flycatcher. And sometimes, like when you go back to some of these Impidinax, like Hammond's flycatcher, sometimes we just have to realize that if we can't hear it, if our hearing is not good or if it's just not calling, then we're best to identify as either Impidinax species or just like Hammond's dusky flycatcher or something like that. But learning the calls for flycatchers is really important. Understanding their behavior is most important. You can also think through habitat. So when you are up in Florida Canyon, think through the different flycatchers that you're going to see there in that kind of oak, Madeiran, evergreen type of habitat, as opposed to Los Cienegos and the grassland habitat. So habitat is a huge thing, not just for flycatchers, but for birds in general. But for flycatchers, I think it's super helpful. But wing, not the wing, the bill shape, the behavior, that's what you pay attention to for flycatchers. So here's the vireos. This is a Hutton's vireo, and small and heavy looking. So vireos often are about the same size as warblers, or maybe a little bigger, but usually about the same size. And often, I think when I first started birding, I often had some trouble trying to figure out whether something was like a warbling vireo or whether it was a warbler. And I don't think I was the only one that sometimes struggled with that until I began to understand what some of the main characteristics of vireos were that I needed to pay attention to. They're always having a fairly thick bill with a slight hook at the end. You can see right here on this Hutton's vireo, there's just a little slight hook at the end of the bill. All vireos will have this. Not always really easy to see. In this particular bird, it is, because it's a good picture and it's really close, but you can pick that up a bit when you're looking at it with your binoculars. So check that out. Look at how thick the bill is. Also think about one way to remember thick bill on vireos is also that vireos kind of have a thick body. They're heavy looking for the most part. Plumbeous vireos, Cassin's vireos, Hutton's vireo, they're all fairly plump, I guess would say. They're also usually a little slower paced in their movement. So we talked about how ruby crowned kinglets kind of bounce around a lot. And this bird right here, this Hutton's vireo, you can see the two different birds here, Hutton's vireo on the left, ruby crowned kinglet on the right. Superficially, same color. Superficially, same sort of eye ring. Superficially, it looks like, they got some white wing bars. But if you look at the bill shape is totally different. You look at the body heaviness shape, and then if we saw it live, the one on the right would be bouncing around, and the one on the left would just be really deliberate in its movement. Deliberate versus bouncy. So another thing about vireos is that many of them have spectacles or eyebrows. So if you get in your bird book, like your Sibley or your Coffin Field Guide or whatever you have, as you look through the vireos, you'll notice that each one of them pretty much has some sort of marks around their eyes. Some of them more than others. Like a Plumbeous vireo has big old white spectacles that really stand out. So if you have something with a lot of stuff around their eyes and it's heavy and it's got a thick bill, then go to the vireo section of your bird book. They're also really vocal. Here's a Hutton's vireo calling. And often, if it's whatever kind of vireo it is, you often hear it before you see it. Bell's vireos, they're gonna be coming back into town middle to late March, and you'll begin to hear their kind of question and answer kind of call. That's a horrible imitation, but it's something that you hear before you see. And so you just have to be patient with these guys. You don't have to be necessarily as patient with flycatchers. You don't necessarily have to be as patient, for sure, with ducks or with gulls. But with these guys, definitely patience is the virtue that is number one for the birder when they're trying to identify it. Just hear it and then take the time to look for it. Now, here's these two again. Let's we already talked about some of the differences. Thicker bill, heavier body, and then the black bar across the secondaries. Does anyone remember last time we got together in December, we talked about primaries, secondaries. So primaries being the first ones, secondary being the second ones, right? So you see how this ruby crown kinglet has this black bar after this second white wing bar. Look on the Hutton's video, the second wing bar, no black bar next to it. So I would say that's not the first thing to look at. And I put that in there to emphasize like the first two things are more important. Body structure, bill structure. Those are the things that first, and I should put just like behavior as well, even before that lacking the black bar. Don't pay attention to the colors and all that first. Pay attention to the body shapes. Any questions up to this point, Danito, or anyone else have any questions?
No.
All right. Let's look at some other awesome birds. So nuthatches are one of my favorite birds. I hope that some of you appreciate nuthatches as much as I do, but I think white-breasted nuthatches and red-breasted nuthatches are the bomb. They're really cool birds. Pygmy nuthatches are all right too. But let's think about these guys along with creepers. So when we see a bird that's hugging the tree, whether it's a trunk or whether it's a main branch, can be normally, I mean, we think woodpecker, but there's also these nuthatches and creepers. So differences between nuthatches and creepers: creepers go head up on a trunk, nuthatches usually head down. They're usually pretty small, often in mixed flocks. They're vocal. Here's a white-breasted nuthatch calling. Kind of a little laugh there. And ooh, here, let me turn that up. Okay. One thing about nuthatches, let me see. Oh yeah, the habitat key. So the reason nuthatches are fairly easy to identify once you get one of your binoculars and you can kind of nail it down. But what I wanted to really emphasize with nuthatches is how tied they are usually to habitat. And a lot of birds, this is one way to either eliminate or focus in on different birds that you're going to see, is just continue to think about habitat. So if you're walking around oak riparian habitat, whether it's like lower in Madera Canyon or whether it's in the riparian area along the Two-Back Danza Trail, the nuthatch you're going to have is white-breasted nuthatch. You could get brown creeper through there. That's brown creepers kind of go through all that, but nuthatch wise, they're going to be in the lower elevations and in the riparian areas. Now, pygmy nuthatches are very, very tied to ponderosa pine. If you don't have ponderosa pines around, you're not going to have pygmy nuthatches. So that's the beauty of identification, is that you can just like eliminate things. So you don't have to identify. It's not like when you have a bird, you have all these different possibilities. You can like narrow that down. That's one of the ways that I think is really a good way to think about identification, is like just Xing off those that it's not. And so narrowing it down. Pygmy nuthatch only going to be in ponderosa pine. Red-breasted nuthatch, they're higher elevation. Sometimes in the winter, they kind of disperse and they come down to even the lowlands or some weird areas. But for the most part, red-breasted nuthatches are going to be very tied to mixed conifer. So like going up to the top of Mount Lemmon is where you would have red-breasted nuthatches, like Marshall Gulch, way up there, from Bear Wallow up. So if you're like at Rose Canyon Lake, you're probably not going to have red-breasted nuthatch. It's just a little bit lower than where you would see them. But you could definitely have pygmy nuthatches because there's a lot of ponderosa pine through there. So just thinking about habitat really helps with the identification process. earlier when we had the 4 different birds together, one of the birds that we had there was a marsh wren. We got the marsh wren here on the left. Let's listen to the call here. I like to, when I hear a bird, to try and figure out like how to describe what I'm hearing. So whenever I hear marsh wren, I think of a sewing machine. Let's listen to it again and think to maybe, you know, if you're familiar with the sewing machine, whether that fits. Everyone's got to come up with their own pneumatic device. So, you know, describe it the way that you think fits for you. We got, along with the marsh wren here, up here, we also have caning wren. One of the best things, we just talked about habitat and how habitat is a good clue for nuthatches. Habitat is also a very good clue for wrens. And the beauty with wrens is that along with those, we also have cactus wren right here. And a lot of the names of wrens, it includes what type of habitat they like. Marsh wren, caning wren, rock wren, cactus wren, sedge wren. I don't know if you've ever noticed that before, but really it's house and Bewick's wren that don't have those little monikers with them of what type of habitat to look for them. But they certainly are like really tied to certain types. So where are you going to see a marsh wren? You're going to see it at the marsh. You're going to see it at Sweetwater wetlands. Canyon wren, you're going to find that in places like Box Canyon. They love being right there in canyons. Rock wrens are going to be, you know, more in the hilly sides where, you know, there's rocks. In fact, they love to stand on the rocks. Someone mentioned earlier about the tail cocked up on a marsh wren. And so that's the same thing with a lot of these guys. They love to cock their tails up. Let me see. Oh, cactus wren has a tail cocked down there. So, but it will bring it up, you know. So placement of where birds are at. So nuthatches, where are you going to see those? You're going to see them usually not on the ground. Hardly, in fact, I've never seen. I saw a pygmy nuthatch on the ground one time, eating a pine cone on the ground. But I can't think of any other time I've seen that. They're normally going to be mid to upper story in the trees, right? The nuthatches. Marsh wrens, for the most part, are going to be on the ground or low story, maybe mid story, but mostly low to low, really low. So think about that for each of these families. So if you see a bird that's way up high in a tree, it's more than likely not going to be a wren. So you can start, you just kind of, we know it's not going to be a marsh wren at the very top of a cottonwood tree. Marsh wren is going to be down either in this low brush like it is right now, or it's going to be in some cattails, caning wren. Likewise, it's not going to be much more than low to mid story. So look in the thick brush, look around the rocks. A lot of times they're just kind of running around in there. Also very secretive, just like vireos, but usually very vocal. You'll hear them first. They have some beautiful songs. Some of them have like really long songs. Many of them sound kind of similar, but they're loud. You know, if you think of a cactus wren, they're really loud birds, or rock wrens. For the most part, wrens are brown. So if you see a small brown bird that's kind of skulking around with a longer pointy bill with a tail cocked up, you know, think through all those different things. If you see a brown bird scurrying on the ground with more of a thicker conical kind of shaped bill, it's not going to be a wren. Wrens don't have that shape of bill. It's probably going to be a sparrow, right? So those are the things that you think through when you see a bird. Bill shape, activity, where in the upper story, mid-story, understory, ground, where is it at? Here's another nice little set of small birds. These are the gnatcatchers. And here in Southeast Arizona, we have 3 different gnatcatchers. And one that is fairly rare, 2 that we can find at different types of habitat again, right? So black-tailed gnatcatcher, very tied to Sonoran desert habitat. Blue-gray gnatcatcher, much more appropriate in like oak woodland habitat. They all have these long tails, and the tails are often really good markers of what species it is. So looking at the underside of these long tails, they often have they all have a really thin bill. They all are again very vocal, usually pretty active. So they're not as deliberate of movers as vireos. You know, the difference between a gnatcatcher and a vireo maybe seem pretty elementary, but when you see a gray bird in the understory of brush, you know, don't pay so much attention to the grayness of the bird, but look at the bill, and that will be your that really should be the first thing to look at. It's a really important thing for us to learn, is to get over just looking at the grayness of a bird, the color of a bird, and look at the other parts of it. The tail is more like it's more similar to a wren tail than it is to a vireo tail. So think about what kind of bird families are what they do have similar. They're often in pairs, so they aren't going to be in big flocks. So if you see a big flock of birds that are kind of in the understory, you can probably guess it's not going to be gnatcatchers. They're probably going to, they could be sparrows, they could be finches, wrens as well. They won't be in big flocks. So think about behavior of whether a bird family likes to flock together or whether there's just in singles or pairs, or maybe triplets, you know, if there's a family group or something like that. Here's a kinglet. We got to talk about kinglets a little bit. We do have ruby crown and golden crown kinglets here in Southeast Arizona. But again, habitat thing is really big. Golden crown kinglets love conifer trees. They're at much higher elevations, and they look fairly different than a ruby crown. But the reason I kept this in here we got to talk about ruby crown kinglets, because I think it's one of the, dare I say, one of the most annoying bird species there are when it comes to identification, because they can be really numerous. Their behavior is all over the place, so they're pretty noticeable. You know, our eyes are really attuned to movement, and they don't skulk around as much as other birds, so they're pretty visible. And so you put your binoculars up there and you almost get like, oh, it's another ruby crown kinglet. But they're also, just because they're plain, because of these wing bars, that little eye ring, sometimes they can have more color in them than others. So like this one's a pretty dull one, but I've seen some fairly yellow ruby crown kinglets. Also, the name kind of throws people off, because when you hear ruby crown kinglet, what do you expect to see? A ruby crown, right? You expect to see that. And so like, I mean, I know I'm not throwing my wife under the bus or anything, but you know, go birding with her. She doesn't go birding all the time, only when she wants to be with me, I guess. But she, you know, we'll see a ruby crown kinglet, and she'll be like, "Hey, what's that bird?" And I'll say, "It's a ruby crown." And she's like, "How do you know that? Like, the ruby crown's not showing. Like, what is that?" And so it can be a little annoying because we don't see that. You know, I hear the same thing with orange crown warblers. That's why orange crowns are hard to identify too, because we have this in our mind, like, oh, it's a ruby crown kinglet. So to identify, I see the ruby crown. You got to take the name that it was given with a grain of salt. It is there at different times, but more often than not, you're going to see it like this. So like I said, here, the small gray, drab, yellowish. So be careful with the color. Moving on from color, think about behavior. Bouncing around, flicks the wings often, can have a fluttery flight, twitchy, can act like a flycatcher a little bit. But again, I love that way of describing it with a squished head. Not very many other birds have a kind of squished in head like that. They're also really small. They got the 2 wing bars, but body shape, and the bill shape, just hone in on those things rather than the color. Thrushes are pretty straightforward. A lot of us are familiar with American robins, depending on where we grew up. I know we get excited for those a lot when they show up in Tucson. They do breed up in the higher elevation here. So like up in Mount Lemmon, they're there year round. But when we get an American robin in our yard or at Sweetwater in the winter, it's always a fun thing. But think about even so, while American robin is a good representative of this family of thrushes, it's not the only one. So there are others that kind of have the same sort of body shape. You can see kind of a plump body and just the structure of how this hermit thrush carries itself is very apropos for whether it's hermit or Swainson's or bluebirds, Townsend solitaire. They all kind of have the same sort of posture, whether they're on the ground or whether they're around a fruiting bush. They can be upper story, mid story. They can be in every story of the forest. So this is one thing to think about with this family that carries over to other families as well, is think about what kind of food they eat and food resources. And so if you're looking in a hackberry that has a bunch of berries and you're seeing some birds in there, it could be just about anything, but think through, it does help a little bit to think through what are those bird species that would eat the berries, the hackberries, thrushes, grosbeaks, waxwings. Those are tanagers. Those are like 4 family groups. You wouldn't necessarily see like a song sparrow or sparrow jumping in and eating the berries, although they could be in that same tree. So just be thinking about like what eats those things, the food source that's around there. All right, thrashers. This is a fabulous time of year for thrashers in our region. So many of our thrashers breed January, February, March, and so they're very vocal this time of year. We were at San Pedro House last week, and there are curve-billed thrashers calling everywhere. Here's one. We're all pretty familiar with thrashers, especially curve-billed. Now, there are a couple other species around here, Crystal and Bendires. They're very tied to habitat. So Crystal thrasher kind of like, they like a little bit more of the foothills area. So not like the foothills neighborhood, but like Pima Canyon. You can find them in there, Florida Canyon. But they'll also be in places like San Pedro House, but they just won't come into the urban areas. Bendire's thrasher, very tied to like, if you've ever been in Bendire's thrasher habitat, you would describe it as, how would it, like, not just scrubby, but just like there should be nothing living here type of thing. So if you're out like Reservation Road, like way out in West Tucson, way out by the Sonoran Desert Museum, that's a good spot. There's like really nothing around there outside of Sparrow National Park, but that really kind of scrub desert habitat with like hardly any type of vegetation is what Bendire's is. But when you think about a thrasher, any thrasher, think about body shape. It's a lot like a mockingbird kind of fits into this too. Long tail, bigger, heavier bird, very noticeable bill, and usually will sing from an exposed perch. And so you think about those different things. When you're walking around your neighborhood and you see a thrasher, here's what I want you to do is to just describe it in your mind. Use some words, put put some definition to it so that when you see a bird, you can readily recognize that's not a thrasher. I don't have to internally think about, all right, is it, I love to just like, it's not that. So it narrows down my choices of what a bird species is. Here's some Cedar Waxwings, which is actually my, I have a lot of favorite birds, but Cedar Waxwing is like 1, 2, or 3, I'm sure. Definitely one of my spark birds, got a cool mask and awesome mohawk and all sorts of cool colors along with that gray. I love it. But Cedar Waxwings and Phainopeplas sit really upright. They're usually higher story. They love mistletoe. So think about, again, that interaction between a bird species and its food. That will help with identification. The crest, if something has a crest like that, you can pretty much say, oh, I know that's not a vireo. And so then give yourself a pat on the back, like, I know what it's not. That's a good start. Warblers. We got to love wood warblers. There are so many warblers that move through here during migration. During migration, warblers are not always tied to specific habitats. So that's one thing that makes it pretty interesting, is that, you have, I noticed I labeled that. I have hermit thrush right there. That's not a hermit thrush. That's a hermit warbler. Oh, horrible. I can't believe I did that. But this hermit warbler here on the right, they breed in like conifer forests of like the Cascades, like Washington, Oregon, California, and they'll be high elevation breeders. But they pass through in places like sweetwater wetlands. So migration, these warblers are not tied to habitat. So you just kind of have to be ready for them. What you look for is bill shape. You can see while all the bills on these 3 birds are shaped a little bit differently. Yellowthroat, a little bit longer than the Lucy's warbler. Also has a little bit of a drop, just a little curve, not much. But all their bills are fairly thin, but not really thin, not like ruby crown kinglet thin, but they're also not thick like a vireo. So they're kind of like in between there. They all have this kind of smaller body shape. Hard to describe. I'm trying to think of the right word to describe the body shape of Lucy's warbler. It's just kind of fit looking. It's not plump. It's not real skinny, but it's just kind of fit. And I think that's kind of how I would describe warblers. They're small and active usually. Most warblers are fairly, they move around quite a bit. We know that because we tried to put it in the scope and it's gone, before the next person can see it. They're insect eaters. Most are colorful in spring and a little bit duller. This hermit warbler is in winter plumage. Lucy's warblers kind of look the same year round. So here's the thing with warblers. They all look pretty different. They all have like shades of yellow or black or gray. Some of them have green. Some of them have red. Again, don't worry about color. Here's what you do with warblers, because we could talk about warblers all day if we want to. We're not going to. You start with the common warblers first. If you live here in Tucson, start with understanding common yellowthroat. Start with, let's say you're here right now. The 3 that you will learn are common yellowthroat, yellow rump warbler, orange crown warbler. And then don't worry, just focus on those. And then as you begin to see other warblers, you can then either say, you can use those 3 as like a baseline for what you're looking for in other warblers. And, you're not going to learn all these at the same time is what I'm saying. Just take your time, learn the 3 that are most common where you're at. If you're in Washington State and you're in Washington State in January, hey, you're lucky. All you have is yellow rump warblers, maybe some Townsend's warblers. So you don't have as much to worry about. But if you're in Washington State in June, you pick Townsend's Warbler, you pick Hermit Warbler, and you pick Yellow Rump Warbler, and you just stick with those three and learn those. No matter where you're at, just take what's next to you and learn 2, 3, or 4. Then the rest will come later.
Luke, can you
Yeah.
repeat the 3 that you recommend for Tucson again to learn?
Yeah, right now, common yellow throat, Yellow Rump Warbler, and Orange Crown Warbler. Now, the cool thing about Yellow Rump Warblers right now, so they're in winter plumage. They'll be coming into breeding plumage probably at the end of February, March. They're starting to change. So, and then male and female yellow rump warblers will look a little different, but they all have, when they fly, they all have that yellow rump patch. And so follow a bird, wait till it flies in the right way to where you can see the rump. And then once you see the yellow and you identify as a yellow rump warbler, don't move on from that bird. Stick with it and look at the other marks on it. So where else is there yellow? Describe the activity, the behavior, put words to it. Look to see where there's any streaking. Look at the throat color, whether it's yellow or white. Look at the facial pattern. Look to see how some of those yellow rump warblers are brighter than others. And then, so that'll help you down the road. I think yellow rump warbler is going to be the #1 warbler to start with, and then everything kind of flows out of that. Orange crown warblers can be kind of funky to deal with too, because there's different subspecies that live here. Some are very yellow. Some of them are very gray-headed, but they all have yellow undertail coverts. They all have a little bit of a dark eye line. They all have a little bit different body shape than yellow rump warblers. They're not as I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to describe it. It's just hard to describe it, but think about the difference. A lot of times, like at Sweetwater or really anywhere around here, you could get orange crown and yellow rump together and try to internalize kind of the differences that you see in between those two. Don't get caught up in looking for the northern parula and the black and white warbler and all these other weird warblers. If you're seeking to build a list, sure, you go do that. But if you're looking to actually really learn and internalize and be able to identify these warblers you see every day, just stick with the ones you see every day. Sparrows, I think, are everyone's favorite, right? I love the juxtaposition between song sparrow and Lincoln sparrow. This is one that when we see Lincoln sparrow at Sweetwater, almost every time we'll point out a Lincoln sparrow, and they're like, the question comes, how do you know that's not a song sparrow? Or I see this bird here. Is this song sparrow or Lincoln sparrow? And so before we get into the differences between those two, just think about first, how did we get to identifying it as a sparrow? They have these kind of shorter conical bills. Conical means kind of like triangular shaped. Usually on the ground, grass is shorter brush. Sometimes they'll pop up and get on top of cattails or get on top of mesquites, kind of, especially some species of sparrows like lark sparrows, vesper sparrows, white crowned sparrows, that they can get a little bit higher and perch up higher. Towhees are part of the sparrow family as well. So they don't have EBird's towhee posted here, but think of an EBird's towhee. They have the same sort of bill. They have the same sort of way that they hold their tail and their body. They're just bigger, right? And they don't have the streaking on them. Some sparrows have streaking, some don't, but they all eat seeds or, sometimes other little insect snacks, but mostly seeds and mostly on the ground. And usually they're brown, and they have different amounts of streaking, different amounts of wing bars and stuff like that. Lincoln Sparrow and Song Sparrow. Someone jump on with me and tell me what the main differences are that you see here. And that'll give me a chance to get a drink of water.
Breast pattern and color.
Yeah, what about the breast pattern? How would you describe that?
Well, let's see. The one on the right seems to have more black and some streaking down through it, more spotty than the other one.
Yeah, it's I would also say very good. Thank you, Laurel. Like really fine streaking. So
Mhm.
the streaking on this Lincoln Sparrow is like really thin, fine, and the streaking on the Song Sparrow is kind of like thicker. And this would be more like if my daughter drew streaking on something. This would be more like if my son was just like putting like big old marks on something. That's kind of how I think about it. You know, like a Song Sparrow is yeah, it's not as fine streaking. And also there's more of like a kind of like a beige kind of buffiness that's underneath of this streaking, while over in the Song Sparrow it's more of just the white, the kind of off white underneath. And even the facial pattern on a Lincoln Sparrow, kind of grayer, buffier, kind of finer looking than a Song Sparrow, just like kind of heavier colors and not as not as like thinly drawn type of thing. So those are some things when you see them actually in action. Like I said, a Lincoln Sparrow kind of moves around fairly like a mouse, and a Song Sparrow much more deliberate. And a Lincoln Sparrow just a little bit smaller, but you can't really see that in this picture. Here are some other sparrows to think about, and kind of gives you an idea of like when you identify something in the sparrow family, what are the next things to look for? Whether they have the streaking on the chest or the lack of streaking helps you to eliminate things. So if you see something with no streaking on the chest, then you can eliminate this guy. You can eliminate Savannah Sparrow, because Savannah Sparrow always has streaking. But if you see one like this white crowned sparrow, right away, all right, not a Lincoln's, it's not a Song, it's not a Savannah, it's not a Vesper. What else? What other sparrows have clean gray breasts? Well, white crown, chipping sparrow has a clean white breast and will have kind of a reddish cap as well. But this immature white crown sparrow has a totally different structure and body structure than a chipping sparrow. Chipping sparrow is like real thin and small, and a white crown kind of big and awkward type of thing. So you look at body shape. Lark sparrow, look at the markings on the face there, and some sparrows have like these black marks. You know, the Song Sparrow kind of Donito. I heard Donito describing a Song Sparrow with the little mark right there is like a patch of chest hair, and some sparrows have like these chest hair patches, like this Lark Sparrow. So you know, it's like it's a bad joke, but like the Austin Powers of sparrows, like with the little chest patches. So you think through that, whether they have wing bars or whether a Lark Sparrow, can't see it in this picture, but it has like white spots on the tail. So as they fly away, sometimes you're like, oh man, the sparrow's flying away from me. That's the best time to look for it. That's the best time to look when it's flying away, and get in your binoculars and seeing if it has white edging in the tail, the Vesper Sparrow, or if it has white spots in the tail, Lark Sparrow. And so these three pictures of different sparrows kind of give you something to think about. Think about the face pattern. See on the Savannah Sparrow, it's got the yellow lores. Some sparrows, not just Savannah, but some other sparrows have like yellow right there in the lores. Remember, we learned that last time in the anatomy part, what the lores are. That's in between the bill and the eye. And so like Lark Sparrow, no yellow. White crowned sparrow, no yellow. But Savannah Sparrow will. grasshopper sparrow will, a few others. So looking at lowers, looking at body structure, those are things to look at for sparrows. I think we just have a couple more families here. Tanagers and buntings, and cardinals, it's kind of like a whole family. Tanagers, cardinals, buntings, they all have fairly heavy bills, kind of larger, heavy bills. They all have, and their males especially, usually have some bright plumage. They're usually pretty mid to upper story. A lot of times, you won't find tanagers like really low. Usually they're mid to upper story. Cardinal and Pyralexia are kind of low story, so they kind of go back and forth. Many of them migrate here. So both Western tanager, varied bunting, these are birds we don't have here right now, but they will come later. So that's something to think about too, is the timing of when you're birding. So if you go birding out right now, you can X out varied bunting. It just starts to narrow it down a little bit. You can always narrow down stuff. Weird things can show up, but out of season, whatever. But for the most part, you can, internally be like, all right, these are there are 50 birds that I could really see here, and kind of then disprove whether that is that species or not. Let's see. Let's go to orioles and blackbirds. Again, a lot of times, or before I really began to understand bird families, I didn't realize how closely related orioles and blackbirds are, but they are part of that same family. They all have long tails, kind of like, thrashers have long tails, but then think about different bill shape, think about different behavior, think about how they, these meadowlarks, blackbirds, they often are more out in the open than thrashers, even though they have some of the same sort of body characteristics, medium to large. Some prefer flocks. A lot of blackbirds, a lot of meadowlarks, even orioles will tend to be in flocks at times. Finches. There's a lot of different finches, depending on where you live. But there's always house finches. There's always lesser goldfinches. Look at the bill shape. This is the thing for finches, bill shape. And I'm going to go to this next one. Yes. So here's a house finch and here's a white-crowned sparrow. Let's look at the differences. Look at the way that its posture, the way that it perches. The posture of a house finch, much more upright. That of a sparrow, much more horizontal. The tail structure will show you that too. The bill, look at the bill on the white-crowned sparrow. It is a little thick. It's conical, but it's not, it's got a totally different shape than this house finch bill. I guess not totally different. It's similar, but you can see the difference. It just depends on how you want to describe the difference, but it is there. It's pretty noticeable. The head shape of a house finch, more like upright with it. Again, white-crowned sparrow, kind of more horizontally lined with the body. Even how the breast sticks out, totally different between the way that a finch perches and the way that a sparrow perches. So think through that. The way that birds fly is also a really good indicator of what type of family they are a part of. The flight pattern of a house finch is kind of more undulating, almost like not quite as undulating as a woodpecker, but it's much more up and down than that of a white-crowned sparrow. And when we broaden this out in a different family that we aren't hitting on today, but horned larks and chestnut-colored longspurs. So Tucson Audubon is doing some longspur surveys here in the next few days. One way to identify whether it's a longspur or a horned lark in flight, besides the call, if you can't hear it, is looking at the way that they fly together in a flock. Horned larks fly all together. They're synchronized. So they pretty much, they kind of all, if one goes up, they all go up. If one goes down, they all go down. For longspurs, it's more like my colleague Jenny McFarland, she describes it as kind of like popcorn when it's starting to pop. Long spurs will some will pop up and down, others will pop down and up, and they kind of go all over the place. And they're in a flock together, but they're not all synchronized. And so sparrows, when they fly pretty direct. When a house finch flies, they kind of got more of an up and down flight. So that's a thing to think about when you see a bird in flight. Just don't dismiss it as, oh, I'm not going to be able to identify that. But look at how it flies, the pattern, and that will help you with the identification. At least maybe help you get it into what family it's in as you learn what those families, how they fly. And so you do that by just zeroing in on a bird and getting to know it rather than trying to identify everything else around it. So that's a lot to take in. I think probably I felt like I was spewing things out from like a fire hydrant, and you guys, taking in little bits and pieces of it. Hopefully some of that sunk in a little bit and it wasn't overwhelming and was fruitful. I want to just end on a couple different things when it comes to becoming a better birder. Is your next step taking note of bird family structure and behavior. And that starts with just in your backyard or at your favorite spot where you like to go birding, just sticking with the bird and sticking with the song sparrow and understanding what makes it a sparrow. And then looking at a white-crowned sparrow, two very common birds, right? I think we could all nail down a song or a white-crowned sparrow at one of our locations. And just seeing what the similarities are, and then looking at a house finch and how are those two sparrows different than a house finch? These are common birds, but these common birds then help propel us to become better birders and understanding families, so that when a rare bird comes or when we go somewhere new, like Costa Rica, and we see a bird, we're like, at least we can like help move it into a family to get us there. And then think about how those species kind of fit together, and how their behavior kind of fits into their family. And, there's always, different species that are kind of take on different parts of different families. But for the most part, generalize it a little bit and look at those birds that you're familiar with and learn what they're doing and how that relates to other bird species that you're seeing. Any questions before we move on here to the next thing or closing it up? Any questions?
Not too many in the chat, just a ton of thank yous, a ton of comments about how much they've learned, not just today, but over the last couple parts. So yeah, not a whole lot of questions, just a lot of gratitude.
Cool.
Can I ask a real quick question?
Please do. Yeah, please do.
What is the best time of day to go birding? Is there a preferred time?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So I love to go birding first thing in the morning, in part because I just can't wait. Like I want to get out and do it. I'm a morning person, so it fits in pretty well with what I do. It also depends on the season. So if it's June in Tucson, the best time to go birding is as soon as that sun, even before the sun pokes its head out, you want to be out there super early, because that's when the activity is at its peak. I would say like right now, my inclination is still to get out there like around sunrise, right? But what I've experienced is that being out there right at sunrise, like at the Patton Center, even though the sun is up, it is still cold. And a lot of those birds, it just takes a little bit of time for them to for the activity to step up. So I would say, as the sun hits different portions of the grounds, the birds just don't become active until the bugs become active. So 8:00, sometimes at Sweetwater, right now, that tends to be like anything earlier than 8, like it probably wouldn't really be worth it unless you're going out there to look for something specific, like a heron or some sort of duck species, or something that's not as tied to the food resources that are also tied to warmth. Now, even during the winter, there are lulls during the day when there's not a lot of activity. So like right now, from 11, even later, like to, I'd say like noon to 4 o'clock, it's can be, you're just not going to see as much as what you would see from like 8 to noon to 4. And we think that maybe the birds become more active in the evening. That some do, some don't. I'm much more of an 8 to 10:30 person right now. Danito, what do you think, man? Like, the morning, right? The morning's always the best.
The morning, I agree with you, but like you said, especially this last month.
Oh, sorry, I meant to mute
Sorry.
myself and I muted you. I meant to mute. Sorry, go speak again.
But yeah,
please.
like you said, it seems the last month it's been about 8:30. The sun's been up. It's just been cold, and like you said, the birds are kind of tucked in, the bugs are tucked in. And I find it moves up. I think February it'll be around 7:30. As it warms up and as the sun gets earlier, it moves up and up. But yeah, the last month it's been about 8:30.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thanks, guys.
That's a rambling answer for you. How's that? And it just really depends on the place too.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
If I'm going to Whitewater Draw, those cranes get out of there super early. I'm not going to get there super early. I like to get there like around 11:30 or something right now as they come back in. But if I'm going to, I went to the San Pedro house the other day, like, it seemed like it was most active right when we first got there, around 8:30. And then, later on during the day, it seemed like it died down. So, any other questions from folks?
Yeah, this Zoom is my first venture into birding.
Oh,
And
John, that's cool.
yeah, this is great. I'm confused but excited. But could
So
you recommend
we still are too, John, so don't worry about it.
could you recommend a good birding book to start with for I live in Phoenix, but between Phoenix and Tucson, this area?
Yes. So actually, the next slide actually has a bird book recommendation. It's not like a field guide. But before I get to that, the field guide that I would recommend, just showing it on my screen right here, it's called the Sibley Birds. This is the Sibley Birds book is, oh, you got it there too, Danito?
Yeah, highly recommend.
They have one for West and East Coast, but I suggest getting the one that's just the full United States Sibley Birds book. It has the best. I'm not a big fan of photographs in my bird books. I think the drawings tend to show better the identification points because a photograph only shows so much. So if you're getting an identification bird book, I would lean towards drawings. The Sibley Guide has the best drawings and has shows some birds in flight. It has little habitat remarks down at the bottom and offers it's the best resource. It's fairly thick. So it's not like one that you're gonna like carry around with you when you go to Gilbert Water Ranch or anything like that. But it is one that it's a resource that's invaluable that I use all the time. Along with that, there's another Sibley guide that's not an identification book, but one that I often use. It's called the Sibley Guide to Bird Life and Behavior. And here I got a picture of it here. Is we talked a lot today about behavior and bird families. This book is the best about bird families behavior that I've ever come across. Again, it's very thick. It's there's illustrations, but it's very word heavy. But it's a valuable resource when you're thinking about, all right, how do nesting habitats, what do birds eat, what kind of habitats are birds tied to, specific bird species. I like it a lot. It's not an identification book. The Sibley Guide to Birds, though, is the one I'd choose.
All right. Hey, thanks. I appreciate that.
For sure.
And then Luke, real quick, actually, Kim had a great suggestion, especially if you haven't bought a field guide. A lot of your local libraries will have them, so maybe you can go and check them out and see which one works best for you. A lot of them are arranged differently, so that might be something before you go out and purchase a book that you might not use a lot. Maybe check out your library, see if they have some. Also, Luke, Beth had a question. You've been out to Whitewater more than I have, so I wanted to ask you, do you know, I know especially this time of year with the cranes there's always going to be crowds. But do you know of maybe a day out of the week that may be less crowded? I assume it's going to be kind of during the week, but just wonder if you have any experience with that.
Yeah, not Saturday or Sunday. And I would say probably not Friday or Monday either, you know, around the weekend. Tuesday, Thursday. I would say one of those, Tuesday or Thursday, probably. Good luck with not having a crowd out there around the cranes.
Hey, can I ask one more question?
Sure, John.
I don't mean to hog into this, but
Oh, no
I've been
worries.
wanting to go down to Whitewater and I haven't made it yet. Since I live in Phoenix, is it still pretty active down there birding with
It
the
is.
herons to go down now? Okay.
Yeah, there's still a lot of cranes there. I would say get there before anytime between now and the third week of February. I
All
would
right.
say would be good. You could go later than that and still catch some cranes, but like I would try to catch before that third week of February.
Great. Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
For sure. Sure. You know what? One time I was there at Whitewater Draw, and there's always a lot of people there, but I saw some folks, they brought like some little tables and some wine and cheese, and they were just like had their little chairs out there and enjoying their wine and cheese while the cranes were coming in. I was fairly jealous. So, all right. Well, thank you guys. That is it. Hey, what I really want to encourage you all is if you do have an opportunity, come join me at for the field portion of this at Sweetwater. Those links will be in the follow-up email if you're able to come down for that. And if you're not, no worries. I'm sure we'll have chances to go birding together again at some point, wherever it's at. We'd love to connect with you that way. And it really is. There's nothing like learning by immersion and putting yourself out there. So thank you guys for being part of this. And just a reminder, our mission, Tucson Audubon's mission, to inspire people to protect and enjoy birds. Thank you for joining us on that. You consider yourself a beginner or whatever. Like you inspire us just as much as anyone else. So thank you so much for doing that and being a part of what we do.
And then last thing, everybody, before we wrap up, again, just a big thank you for joining us. Thanks to Luke for putting on a great presentation. And then I know Brenda just asked in the chat if we could share the recording. And so just so you know, the answer is yes. I will be sending out an email here a little bit later. It takes me some time to get it uploaded onto YouTube, but I'll send out an email that will have the link to this recording in it. And then, like I said earlier, while you're there, we also have parts 1 and 2 of this one. If you missed it or maybe want to go back and look at it, as well as just a host of other really informative, entertaining presentations. So I always encourage people to take a look around our YouTube channel. There's a lot of great content there. And so if we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Like I said, thank you all for attending. Thank you all for helping us further our mission of enjoying and protecting birds. And that is all we've got. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys. See you around soon.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.